Okay, so welcome to this edition of Ragged Theology podcast, folks. Ragged Theology has been going for about 8 years now, and we're just launching into the world of podcasts. As most of you know, Ragged Theology was set up after I was inspired by the life of Dr. Thomas Guthrie, who lived from 1803 to 1873, and he was a very faithful Christian preacher. He was a philanthropist, he was a social reformer, and he held to solid biblical Christianity, but he also had a love for the marginalised and made Christianity very attractive. And just over the last few months, I've been talking to a lot of pastors about their experience in lockdown, so I thought it'd be good to do some podcasts, and I'm delighted today to welcome my good friend, Barry Douglas, who's all the way from the frozen north in Aberdeen. So it's good to have you, Barry.
Thank you, Andy. It's really good to be here. Great to see you. Yep.
Barry and I speak every 2 or 3 weeks. Barry's my shoulder to cry on and my faithful counsellor. So great to see you, Barry.
Yeah, thanks, Andy.
I think we met about 10 years ago. Is that right? When I first came to Aberdeen with Bethany Christian Trust?
That's right. It was 10 years ago. We met and we just were looking at various opportunities for ministry at that point in time, what we could do in partnership with Bethany. And that was gosh, I can't believe, but you're right, it was just over 10 years ago, Andy. Yeah. And that was a great journey, just getting to know you and just journeying with you and seeing what we could do and reaching the lost and needy and broken in Aberdeen. Yeah.
So just give us a wee bit about your background, Barry, where you're from. You're from a small town just west of Edinburgh, is that right?
West of Edinburgh. Yeah, lived in Glasgow for a number of years, many years. In fact, originally lived in South Africa, emigrated out there when I was 10 months old, or 8 months old it was, and then came back home in 1977. And then settled in Glasgow, lived in Glasgow, and more or less would say I kind of grew up in Glasgow, and just in various parts of Glasgow I lived, Andy, and latterly actually moved out towards South Lanarkshire to a little kind of market town there called Straven, before moving up to Aberdeen in 2007. Gosh, my goodness, 13 years, 14 years it'll be this summer we've been in Aberdeen. So yeah, that's mainly my background. Married to Anne, got 2 boys, 26, 23. And the Lord called us very clearly up to Aberdeen 14 years ago, which is just, it's been a great move for us. It's been a great journey. And yeah.
When were you first called into the ministry, Barry?
Well, I mean, it's interesting, Andy. From the age of, I got saved, I would say at 19, very clearly gave my life to the Lord. Was brought up in church, but, had 1 foot in the world, 1 foot in the church. And to be honest with you, didn't really fully understand what it meant to be committed. And I gave my life to the Lord when I was 19. And at 21, I just had a sense of call in my heart that was growing and growing, that I would end up in ministry, full-time ministry. Didn't know how it would look. And then at the age of 31, ended up at ICC. I remember studying theology there for 3 years, thinking actually that we'd end up back out in Africa in the mission field. But actually the Lord closed the doors, very clearly closed the doors as well. There was no doubt in it. But I ended up working for Africa Inland Mission, as they were known back then. I became their Scottish director, and I looked after a number of missionaries just throughout Scotland, and looked out after them when they were obviously in the mission field, and made many trips out to Africa. Did that for 3 years, but it was very interesting, Andy. I would say it was during that period with Africa Inland Mission that one of my jobs was to go around promoting mission throughout Scotland. And the idea was promoting, obviously, the mission of God, and perhaps it may be Africa. And I'll never forget one Sunday I was preaching, and it was out in Bishopbriggs. I was preaching in a church there on the Sunday morning, and I came home and I said to Anne, something's not right, Anne. I said, I'm supposed to be preaching mission and for folk to be thinking about Africa. But as I'm going around Scotland, the Lord's just burdening my heart for Scotland. And I would say that burden just grew and grew and grew. And what ended up happening was a particular Sunday, I was up preaching up at Gilcomston South in Aberdeen. Dominic Smart asked if I'd come, and I went up there, and that's where I would say a conversation started back in 2006. A conversation started, would I consider coming up to be their associate minister? So that was probably the journey, and it was in the summer of 2007 that Anne and I and our two boys, we moved to Aberdeen and began what I would say is church ministry, full-time church ministry.
So about 10 years ago, when I first met you, you were feeling called to start a new church in an area called Seaton in Aberdeen. Mm-hmm. Maybe just before we go into that, can you just tell us, you've got a few other responsibilities, haven't you, apart from being a pastor? You're also a chaplain.
Yeah, I'm also the chaplain for Aberdeen Football Club. That's been a really interesting journey. In the early days at Aberdeen Football Club, they'd never had a chaplain before, and so in I came, and that was just an incredible journey. In the early days, certainly we had Bible studies every Thursday with about 5 of the players and a number of the staff, and we'd regularly do the Bible studies. And it was just an incredible journey, actually, and I'm still in touch with a number of those players who are now retired. And in fact, it's been very interesting, actually. I've had quite a lot of communication with ex-players during lockdown this whole year. Lockdown's brought challenges. I know I don't want to race ahead of myself, but when we're talking about football, a lot of these retired guys, it's brought challenges to them, and it's just been great to speak into their situations and just to help and to be a listening ear. And so I'm with Aberdeen Football Club. It's a challenging time just now at the club. Is a challenging time as for the team just now, So I'm in touch with them as well at different points during this period. Yeah.
The goals are raining in now, though, aren't they?
Well, we got one against the mighty Camarnicans Saturday, so that's the start. The next game's Celtic, so as long as we win there,
you get a hat trick there, no bother.
Aye.
So about 10 years ago, you started feeling the call to set up a new church in Seaton. So tell us about Seaton. What kind of area is it? What led you to feel, tell us about the calling to set up a new church there.
Yeah, I mean, it's very, very interesting. It's funny. I remember a church planting specialist said to me, would you consider going and planting a church? And he probably said that to me about 12 years ago. And I said to him, absolutely no way. I was quite content to be a number 2. And but what happened, and what's always been in my heart is always for the poor and marginalized and the downtrodden and the broken. And I've always had that vision. I've always had that heart, and that's where I guess that's where you and I, Andy, just really got to know one another, was through Bethany Christian Trust and what they could do. But it was such a strange thing that happened. I was walking home one day, and I was walking along King Street, and I passed by the community of Seaton on my right-hand side, which is down near the beach, and it's like high-rise flats and various stuff like that. And it was the strangest thing, but I just felt almost being dropped into my heart was the sense of, I want you to go and start a church there. And I thought, that's the strangest thing. And I just pondered it, and I just kept it to myself, and I didn't say anything. But it wouldn't leave me. It would not leave me. And it just grew and grew and grew, just that sense of God calling. God was putting a call in my heart to go and plant a church in this community. And so I began to explore, that whole thing of just going and having a look and seeing what was out there. I eventually, one particular Saturday morning, just sat down with my wife, Anne, and said, I think God's calling us to go and plant a church in Seaton. And I'll never forget my wife. My wife turned around and said, I'm listening to you. She said, I'm just not there yet. And I fully understood what she was meaning, you know. What happened was just that call just grew and grew and grew. And also other people started to recognize it. And I just felt the Lord just really continuing to confirm and affirm what was within me. And so I remember at the time just thinking, what do I do with this? What do I do with this call? Because, you know, the church I was in was very busy, plenty going on, really thriving. And I just felt to lay it down. And I remember it must have been in the August of 2011. Yes, that'd be right. The August of 2011, I decided to lay Seaton down, and I said, Lord, if this is of you, you'll need to raise it up. And actually, we had the Toasty Club running in the church and in partnership with Bethany, and we were having a Christmas carol service. So it must have been about the 22nd, I think, of December. We were hosting a Christmas carol service for the Toasty Club. And we must have had about 25 or 26 people, and they were going to get the Christmas lunch. They were going to get a 10-minute gospel presentation, a couple of carols, and then a food parcel. And just as I stood up to speak, in walked two policemen. And I just thought to myself, oh no, I said, they're here to arrest somebody, and it just, I could just do without this. I'll never forget it. And I went over to the two policemen and I said, gents, can I help you? And they said, yeah, we've heard all about this Toasty Club. We would love to see and just be part of it today. Do you mind if we stay and just watch what goes on? And I went, oh, of course. And so carried on. We did the little 10-minute preach. We gave them their food. We gave them all a Bible as a Christmas present. And then I went to have a chat with the police. And this is, I'll never forget the words. It was a Sergeant Andy Barclay. He's now an inspector. He's a great guy. And he turned around and said, his exact words, Barry, we're desperate for help. Would you be willing to help us? And I just think when, you know, you get the police coming to you, coming to the church, coming to Christians asking for that, you cannot say no. And so I said, yes, of course. Whereabouts are you? He said, we're down in Seaton. He said, this community desperately needs help. And I remember just like feeling my legs buckle a bit. And I remember kind of getting butterflies thinking, oh my goodness. So in January, I set up a meeting to go down to Seaton, and I remember as we headed down to Seaton to meet with Andy and also the inspector, we sat down and we had this meeting, and they just shared their heart of just the needs in Seaton that were huge. And they then turned around and said, we'd like you to meet a lady who heads up the Seaton Management Committee. And to cut a long story short, I eventually met her. And she told me all the things that they were doing in Seaton. And I thought, goodness, they're doing more than the church. This was a group of single mums just doing an incredible job, desperately, really passionate about their community. And so they were doing a huge amount of different things. And I'll never forget, they then turned around and said to me, right, Barry, now that we've told you what we can do, what can you offer? And I remember I opened my mouth and I simply said, the only thing, ladies, that I can offer you is Jesus Christ. And they all burst out laughing, and they turned around and said, well, that's the meeting finished. And I remember walking out and I thought, oh, why did I say it like that? Oh, I must have come across as really weird. Oh, and I started to just get concerned about what I'd done. But I thought, I'll leave it in God's hands. 2 weeks later, this lady phones me up, who I spoke with, and who's the chair lady. She said, would you come and see me again, please? I went, oh, yeah. And so I came down to see her, and she said, I kind of liked what you shared. I said, what? That I can offer you Jesus Christ? And she went, yeah. She said, we'd like to go on a journey with you. And so I remember one weekend we got a bus that had been kitted out like a coffee bar, and we put on kids program, and the police came, the fire service came, and we put on various things. Well, on the Sunday afternoon when we were just finishing up, the sergeant came up to me and he says, Barry, the ladies have asked if I'd come and speak to you, and they've asked basically, would you come and plant a church here? Would you come and start a church in this community? Andy, these were a group of unsaved ladies who didn't know anything about Jesus, but were coming to the church and coming and asking us to come and start a church. And so that must have been about the February of 2012. And I began to go on a journey. I began to speak with the leadership and various stuff like that. And so they eventually recognized that there was a call here. And so they very graciously, they sent me out. I said goodbye to them. And on August the 26th, that was on my last Sunday. And I think it was September the 2nd, was our first of 2012, was our first ever service in a little community hut, right in the heart of Seaton. A little community hut, I hasten to add, that wasn't fit for purpose, but that's where we started our first service on the 2nd of September 2012. Yeah.
Incredible, eh?
Yeah.
No, I remember that hut very well.
Yeah. Yeah, it was pretty dilapidated, Andy.
What would you say are some of the challenges in Seaton, Barry?
I suppose some of the challenges, there's many challenges. So first of all, I mean, it's a regeneration area. It's very high up in the deprivation index. It's got a number of challenges socially. A lot of single mums, a lot of single parents, a lot of drugs. A lot of prisoners, when they come out of jail, get rehoused there. We've had a number of challenges in that area. Quite a lot of disorder. But yeah, I think, you know, a number of things like that. Immense poverty, quite a lot of poverty, quite a lot of challenges there socially. Yeah. I mean, I remember when we started in 2012, for child poverty, it was the 13th poorest area in Scotland for child poverty, you know. So it kind of, you get the picture. It's all council housing, and with these big monstrosities of tower blocks, of something like about 7 of them are there, and yeah, it's challenging. But
also some good community spirit.
Oh, Andy, I think that's the thing that I love. They tell you what they're thinking. They don't leave you in any doubt, but, you know, like, so for instance, those ladies that invited me right at the beginning, you know, today I'm friends with them all, got a lot of time for them all, care for them, love them, and I know that they love the church, they love what's going on, even though they haven't made a commitment to the Lord. This group of ladies, they've come along at times, they've heard the gospel, they've come along to various events, we've helped their children. We just love them, but they're just wonderful, wonderful people. They really, really are. The core of Seaton is a really, really strong community. And so to be able to be invited to come in there, and it was just a thing of the Lord, actually, to be honest with you, and to be accepted. It took a while to be accepted. It took a while to be trusted. But I would say I started to notice a change after about 5 years of the church plant, where at that point we started to get credibility that we were here to stay. We started to get credibility that that we were trustworthy, that we cared for people, that we didn't come with any agenda except that to preach Jesus.
Mm-hmm. And but 10 months ago, we came into lockdown, and things changed for all of us. Can you tell us a little bit about how you've approached pastoral care over the last 10 months? We've been in and out of 3 different lockdowns. You've told me some amazing things of what Seaton Community Church has done. Can you tell us a little bit about lockdown in Seaton?
So it was really, really interesting. I was actually on holiday, Andy, in the March of last year when COVID broke out, and in fact our holiday got cut short and we had to come home. But I remember during that second week of the holiday when it suddenly became that everything was shutting down. And at that point in time, we didn't have our own building. We had bought land for £1, but we were still using the school. And suddenly the school got taken from us. We couldn't use the school at all. And we suddenly had to go online. I just remember just having that sense in my heart that the last thing that the Lord wanted was the church to go backwards, but we were to go forwards. And so we very, very quickly, within 2 weeks of lockdown, we began an Alpha course, because I just had that sense in my heart, Andy, that people were going to start to ask questions, life questions, just the meaning of life, what's going on just now. People were looking for answers. People were looking to be anchored. And so I just had that sense that actually it was an opportunity for the gospel to go forward. And so as a pastor, that's the first thing we began. We began to run Alpha. We promoted Alpha, and we ran an Alpha course. On top of that, it just obviously became a challenge, what we could do pastorally, and so we had to be creative and we had to think out the box. In our church, we've got a wonderful family worker, Kirsty Harold, and so Kirsty was incredible with the mums, does an incredible job with the mums and with the children. And so what Kirsty started to do was Kirsty started to go walks when we were allowed to go walks, 1 hour exercise, and she connected. We just made various connections. We quickly learned about, media, Zoom. Who heard of Zoom before COVID came? We quickly tapped into it. And we just started to do a host of things through Zoom. We continued to reach out to women in the church. We continued to reach out to people and just to try and find creative ways of doing it, Andy. And so, we also just tried to have a regular pattern where we could phone people, we could connect with people, we could talk with them. We also tried to make the services on a Sunday, we tried to make them relatable, because we very quickly started to realize that we were getting a host of listeners and viewers that had never come to our church. And we started to discover as well that we began to feed the people, because we discovered that a number of the kids were going without meals. And so we managed to get funding, and we struck up a partnership with an organization where we were able to provide 100 packed lunches a day, 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesdays and Fridays. And we got a team, we got them all kind of geared up to go, because the school asked us to help as well. Could we help with these families that were really hungry? And so we went on that journey where we did that, but we started to just communicate with them when we went around the doors and really got a handle on the pastoral issues. And then very simply, Andy, pastorally for the church, I began to preach things like, so I did a series on the promises of God. And so we focused on a series, on about a 12-week series on just the promises of God, and looking at the promises of God and the word of God that we could hold on to in tough times. I also then looked at hope in hopeless situations, and I looked at various biblical characters. The Bible is full of characters that were in hopeless situations, but when God came through for them, they came through with immense hope. And so, I started to just preach, I would say, very, very practically, in order that they could take what they were hearing on a Sunday and apply it on a Monday and just help them. Yeah, that's the journey we went on.
So am I right in saying that you were delivering 300 packed lunches a week?
Yes.
Wow.
So in total, we've just, I think the count now, when that last lockdown finished and things started to return back to normal, the kids went to school, we stopped it. And then in this second lockdown that started in January, we tapped into 60 kids a week. So it's over 7,000 lunches, packed lunches that we did during the lockdown period, Andy.
That's incredible.
Yeah. You
must have a good team around you to make that happen.
It's a great team. It really, really is a good team. This second lockdown, we've had to limit the team just for social distancing and just, but in fact, this second lockdown, I would say, has been definitely, I would almost describe it as being darker. And what I mean by that, Andy, is people are struggling in this second lockdown. this lockdown's hard. I don't know whether it's just because it's winter or because people have now lost their jobs in Seaton. It's definitely darker, and so it's just been, we're just constantly just trying to be a smiling face and try to encourage people. And so many people are tuning in on a Sunday to listen to the message, and so it's been good. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
And as you think back yourself over the last 10 months, what would you say have been some of the personal challenges for you as a pastor?
I think not being able to connect with people. I think not being able to, properly kind of disciple people and come alongside people the same. It's been challenging when I've got the phone call of a marriage breaking up and just having to do it over the phone when somebody just maybe needs a hug or somebody just needs contact, face-to-face contact. We've had a few concerns with people in our church who have suffered from COVID, or we've had death in the church, and that's been hard with only 20 people. I think, again, it was also, I love this little saying, Andy, and I always hold on to it, and that is, am I a victim or am I a student? It's a very, very simple saying, but it really speaks into myself. When we're a victim, it's woe is me, and oh, look at me, and I'm struggling with this and I'm struggling with that. But if I have the mindset of, or am I a student, I guess my mindset's tried to be, well, what can I learn out of this, both as a pastor, both as a father, as a husband, and just as a Christian, what can I learn? And so I would say I've learned an awful lot out of it. I've tried to kind of keep myself fresh. I mean, I've also been heavily involved with a building project last year. Again, it's such a long story, Andy, but the Lord provided an incredible piece of land for us where the church first originally started. And we got that for £1. In 9 months, Andy, we raised over £500,000 miraculously. Wow. Just miraculously, Andy. And we decided as a church we'd build the building ourselves. And so when we went into lockdown, we'd been working away for, quite a number of months. From the year before, we'd started to do the work. We'd started to lay the foundations in September 2018. Yeah, what year are we? 2021, 2020 was last year. No, so we laid the foundation in 2019, September 2019. So we were starting to do a building project. So when we went into lockdown, everything had to shut. And then when building sites could open, we had a number of guys who were in furlough. And so they were like, well, what can we do? And so our project manager was in furlough. And so we basically all went down to the building site. And for 6 months, we worked 6 days a week. And we brought the building in on time. Well, we bought the building in, Andy, a year early. Doing it this way, it's just been miraculous. So as of December the 14th, we got our completion certificate. We've got an incredible facility right in the heart of Seaton. So a lot of us were involved with that. But I would say, to answer your question just about, things like myself, this second lockdown, I'm working from home now. We can't be in the building. The church is closed just now for the time being. But this second lockdown, again, I've treated it like, okay, Lord, what can I do now? What do you want to say to me? And so I did an incredible thing, Andy. I decided to do the Bible, read the whole Bible in 30 days. And, it was brilliant. I didn't read it necessarily with a devotional mindset. I read it to get big picture. Like, so for instance, Andy, reading the book of Job just in one sitting, I've never done that in my life. But, oh my goodness, just how that book spoke to me. So much so, actually, that I picked out one of my old ministers, a dear friend, George Phillip, who did his devotional Faith in the Dark on readings from Job, just to get fresh insight, to get more insight. And so I've been doing things like that, Andy. I've tried to do things like that. I've tried to keep myself fresh that way. I've tried to read. I've just tried to, just prepare in different ways for when the church does open, Andy. Yeah.
I think I was saying to you, I went through the book of, I went through the life of Joseph with my team, and when I was listening into Creef this year, Jonathan Lamb was speaking, and he said that the opposite of fear is not courage, but trust.
Yes.
And I just thought so much about that with the life of Joseph, that for 13 years he had setbacks and knockbacks, and yet he trusted in God's faithfulness and goodness, you know.
Yes.
And that's been a real inspiration to me through lockdown, you know. But I agree with you, this lockdown has felt a lot harder, and just in our own charity Safe Families, we've seen a lot of families really struggling. So.
Yeah, it has been difficult. It really has been. It's definitely felt at times just darker, I would say, you know, just with some of the people we're dealing with and the challenges that they're facing. Yeah.
And you were mentioning just your work as a football chaplain during lockdown. You've had some opportunities. And
I mean, yes, there has been, Andy. You know, what people often forget are footballers are just like you and me. You know, they have got challenges both at the workplace, and they've also got challenges outside of football. And I've had quite a number of phone calls with some of the footballers who are just facing challenges just now, just with life. You know, there was obviously much publicised stuff went on in the last lockdown, right at last year when some of the footballers went out one night, 8 of them, as they're known now as the Aberdeen 8. And, you know, just, you know, when they basically got, you know, spoken about and all sorts of stuff printed about them, you know, it was very, very challenging for them. And yeah, I mean, I suppose one of the things of being a chaplain is confidentiality is really important. But you know, they're just human beings like you and me. They make mistakes like you and me. You know, we all make mistakes, and you know, it's just that sense of just trying to be light in a dark place and trying to encourage them and trying to build them up. And then on top of that, then there's injuries as well. And so, you know, when they're injured, it's just challenging for them just now. You know, when there's not a lot else they can do, and they just sit and yeah, it's just challenging in many ways. But not only that, there's also then Aberdeen employ over 100 staff, you know, so it's a big club. And so there's not only the footballing stuff that happens on the pitch, but also behind the scenes. And yeah, and then there's things like, so, you know, you see what happens when the club's not doing well, the team's not doing well. You know, you see all sorts of malicious and wicked things being said that just basically aren't true, you know, and you know, people have to deal with that, people have to cope with that, and so there's many challenges there. So yeah, that's been interesting as well. Yeah. I tell you one thing, Andy, that's been a real blessing during lockdown. I've done 2 lockdown weddings, and Andy, 20 people. I'm absolutely convinced that's the way forward. Small weddings,
down the costs
in the back garden, keep the costs down, and have a barbecue outside. Oh, Andy, they have the 2 weddings that I did. In fact, one was my son, the other one was a dear couple in our church, and just absolutely wonderful and so life-giving. But yeah, just almost like a sense of perspective, Andy, you know, not going for 150, 200 people at a huge thing, you know, and, you know, Aunt Jemima, who you've never met, or you met her when you were a little kid, you know, but you feel obliged to invite her, you know. So, yeah, there we go.
So just getting back to preaching, I'm quite interested in this, just preaching through lockdown. How have you coped with preaching online? How has that been for you?
I'm sure I'm probably going to give the answer that you've probably heard most people say. It's awful. It's just awful. I've had to learn an awful lot, and they just, you know, like, so for instance, like, look at the camera. You know, I've also just had to, I don't know, initially I kind of got caught up in this whole thing of the professionalism, and it's got to be like the BBC standard, you know. And I'll never forget one Thursday evening. Our cut-off in our church is Thursday night, 5 o'clock. Everything's got to be in the Google Drive for the editing team then to begin working on it. And I remember this Thursday, it was lunchtime, and I was doing something like about my 12th take, Andy. And I broke down. I just wept and wept and wept. And I would say, looking back, that was probably the lowest point for me in all of the lockdown, just trying to do this 12th take and just like having to say, Barry, get a grip. You know, it's the message. It's not just all about the presentation. It's about the message, and folk will be forgiving and various stuff like that. And you know, they have been, Andy. But yeah, it's challenging. I don't enjoy it. It's the one thing I don't enjoy, Andy. I find it hard on a Sunday morning to sit with my family and watch myself on YouTube channel. I don't like it. I feel uncomfortable with it. I don't like hearing myself. So yeah.
I think a lot of pastors are saying that the big challenge is when services are pre-recorded, that you don't always know how many people are gathering around at 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning, and people are just drifting to other churches sometimes, and I guess congregations are scattering really, and that's been a real concern for a lot of pastors, I think.
Yeah. I've tried just to simply remind myself, Andy, that it's God's church and He'll build it, and thank goodness I'm not in charge. I would say in the early days of lockdown, I got myself a wee bit kind of hepped up about that, and I remember our denomination said, you're going to lose income, you're going to lose people, and all this sort of stuff. And God's just been so faithful to us. I think we could steadily, consistently get about 130, 140 people every week listening. And God's blessed us financially in just incredible ways, yeah.
I think some of the worst fears haven't materialised. I think a lot of churches have done well financially during the lockdown, and there's been some great stories about churches actually looking after each other and staying together. So just a final question, Barry, just as you think back over the last 10 months, what would you say is the key thing you've learnt about yourself, particularly as a pastor? And what do you think you've learnt about the Lord over the last 10 months?
I think what I've had to learn is that it's God's church and He'll build it. I think as pastors, sometimes we can get ourselves really kind of caught up with that, God really needs us. And actually, really what I'm seeing in this is actually, He's in control. I think I'm also learning a lot about patience, Andy, and just trusting in the Lord. There's a beautiful verse, or there's a beautiful part of a verse in Psalm 78, Andy, and I'll be honest with you, I have feasted on this psalm for the whole of lockdown 1 and lockdown 2, and it's in Psalm 78, and it's just a little verse here that says this. It's the second part of the verse 19. It says, "Can God really spread a table in the wilderness?" And the psalmist here is talking about how God's just been with the children of Israel and various stuff like that, but they grumbled and complained and they continued to sin against Him. They spoke against God and they said, "Can God really spread a table in the wilderness?" And I guess I feasted on that because it's almost like, Andy, we as pastors, we as churches are like, the old-fashioned circus type idea where you get the trapeze artist and, they're hanging onto the bars and then they let go and in midair, they're suddenly stretching and they're reaching out for the next bar. Well, we're like in the midair. We're in that place of we don't know what's going to happen next. We don't know when churches are going to open. We don't know how church is going to look like. We don't know whether people will come back. We don't know how we're going to manage and various stuff like that. And, that's how I see it as we reach out to that next bar and take hold of things. And it's that whole sense of, as much as it's uncertain and various things like that, for me, Andy, it's that thing, can God really prepare a table in the midst of the wilderness? And I would say yes and amen. And not only does He will, and He'll continue to do it. And I think that's been the strength I've taken during this time, Andy, that, God can prepare a table in the midst of the wilderness. And I think also the other thing that I've taken from this is that he's in control, Andy, that I actually need to just stand back, play my part. He would dare to use me in that way, which is just wonderful, but actually just see what he's going to do. And I think, that's just been the thing, and so for instance, there's been times when, we've thought, right, okay, how are we going to get money for this lunch program? And then just suddenly it comes. I remember quite a few weeks ago, I think within about a week, we needed about £750, and it just, through no petitioning of it, it just all came in. And I see that as just, again, can God prepare a table in the midst of the wilderness? Yes, he can. And I think also another important aspect of that, Andy, is that actually to see God prepare the table, to see him prepare the table in the midst of the wilderness, we do have to walk through hardship. We do have to go through hardship, like Joseph. Joseph's a classic example of what you're talking about, of the hardship he had to go through, the undoing. And so I think there's more of that still needing to be done in all of us, Andy, and certainly in myself. It's just that undoing. And so, yeah, that's where I'm at just now, Andy, Well, still on the journey.
Great verse. We should sing Psalm 78 to finish off.
Well, there you go, Andy. I'll leave you to it, You good free church guys know how to do it.
Well, it's been a real inspiration to talk to you, Barry. It's just incredible that you managed to build a church and give out 7,000 lunches in lockdown. I just find that so inspiring. And I think I've said to you on many occasions, you've been a great inspiration to me in my own Christian life. And it's great to call you a friend. And
likewise.
We just wish you every blessing at Seaton. It was such a privilege to be around at the start of it all, and I'm sure there's a long journey still to go there, and God's got lots to do. So,
yeah, no, I miss you loads, Andy. I miss not seeing you. I miss our times of fellowship. They were really, really special to me. But there you go. Maybe sometime when I'm down in the Central Belt, eh?
Yeah. Great. Well, I just want to thank Barry for coming on to Ragged Theology podcast. I hope you've enjoyed that today, folks. And we're hoping to do some more podcasts over the next few weeks. So stay tuned in for that. But we'll say goodbye just now. And thanks again to Barry for joining us.
Thank you, Andy.